Maryland isn't the first place most people think of when it comes to ancient mysteries, but that's exactly what makes it interesting. Beneath the quiet woods, old riverbeds, and historic towns, there are stories that go way back, some forgotten, some half-buried, and some still unfolding. From sacred native sites to strange fossils, haunted tunnels, and ghostly legends tied to real history, Maryland has more going on beneath the surface than most realize. Let's take a closer look. Shell Middens of the Chesapeake Bay, Maryland's disappearing ancient sites. If you've ever wandered along the quieter, more remote parts of the Chesapeake Bay, you might have stumbled across something strange: old mounds of oyster shells, stacked high and wide, almost like nature left them there on purpose. At first glance, they might just look like leftovers from a big seafood feast, but these piles aren't modern trash, they're thousands of years old. And they tell the story of the people who lived here long before Europeans set foot in Maryland. These shell piles are called Middens, and while they might technically be ancient garbage dumps, they're way more than just trash heaps. Middens are full of clues, layer upon layer of shells, animal bones, burnt wood, broken tools, and bits of pottery. They tell us what people ate, how they cooked, how long they stayed in one place, and even who they traded with. In a world where written records didn't exist yet, Middens are the next best thing. Around the Chesapeake Bay, oysters were everywhere. Easy to find, easy to eat, and available all year. Native communities relied on them heavily, and over generations, as they cracked open shell after shell, the piles grew. Without trash collection or landfills, these Middens became long-term markers of human presence. Some of the Middens in Maryland are over 3,000 years old. Just think about that. That's older than the Roman Republic, older than the Parthenon. These aren't just little piles tucked away in the woods. They can stretch for acres. At first glance, they might just look like odd overgrown hills, but if you dig even a little, you'll hit dense layers of oyster shells, some blackened by fire, others still cracked from when someone pried them open centuries ago. You'll find deer bones, carved bone fishhooks, and shards of pottery, marked with intricate patterns. Each layer is a snapshot of a different time. Most archaeologists think these Middens were seasonal sites. Native families would return to the same spots every spring or summer, set up camp near the shore, and gather oysters in bulk. Some would be eaten right away, others roasted or dried for later. The Middens weren't built overnight, they grew slowly, year after year, generation after generation. Some even show signs of long-term use: fire pits that were rebuilt again and again, post holes from shelters, and layers of ash that hint at cooking or ceremonies. You can picture it: families setting up camp near the water, teaching their kids how to collect oysters, cooking over open fires, telling stories as the sun set behind the trees. These places weren't just about survival, they were about tradition, memory, and community. But here's the sad part: many of these Middens are vanishing, and fast. Coastal erosion, sea level rise, and construction have already destroyed dozens, maybe even hundreds of sites. Some were bulldozed before anyone knew they were there. Others are falling into the bay piece by piece, lost to the waves. In some places, Middens are now completely underwater. That raises some big questions. How many more sites are out there, buried beneath the Chesapeake? Were some of these Middens part of larger villages, or maybe even permanent settlements? Could there still be tools, ceremonial objects, or fire pits hidden beneath the mud? Without careful excavation, we may never know. There's also another layer to this story, one you won't find just by digging. Some of Maryland's indigenous groups, like the Piscataway and Nanticoke, have passed down oral histories that match up with known Midden sites. For these communities, the Middens aren't just old garbage, they're living landmarks. Places tied to ancestors, to spiritual traditions, to stories that still matter today. One powerful example comes from the 1970s, near the mouth of the Patuxent River. Construction crews uncovered a massive Midden site. Archaeologists rushed in and found more than just oyster shells. There were burial pits, ceremonial items, and artifacts that showed trade with inland communities. It was a huge discovery, but after a short window of study, the site was buried again. Today, most people don't even know it's there. Even with so many sites gone or forgotten, the Middens we've studied have changed how we understand early life around the bay. They challenge old ideas that native people were always on the move, chasing food. In reality, they were careful planners. They managed the ecosystem, understood seasonal cycles, and had long-standing ties to specific places. Some Middens even suggest early aquaculture. By placing rocks in the right spots, native communities may have helped oyster beds grow back faster centuries before the idea of sustainability even existed. It wasn't just about taking from the land, it was about working with it. If you visit the bay today, especially spots like Calvert Cliffs, Deal Island, or the eastern shore marshes, you can still catch glimpses of this ancient world. Some middens are hidden under layers of brush, others poke out from crumbling cliffs, or lie buried under sand, exposed after storms. You might not even realize what you're seeing unless you know the signs, but once you do, that odd hill or sudden crunch underfoot starts to feel different, more like a whisper from the past. The trouble is, almost none of these sites are marked. There are no plaques, no warning signs, no fences, and with every storm, every inch of shoreline lost to erosion, more middens crumble away. We're learning to appreciate them just as they disappear. Which brings us to the real mystery. How much have we already lost? How many untold stories were washed away before anyone had the chance to ask? That said, it's not all hopeless. Some archaeologists and tribal communities are working together now more than ever. A few midden sites have been protected. There's also a growing understanding that these places aren't just historical, they're cultural. They deserve the same care and attention we give to colonial towns, battlefields, or historic buildings. But protecting them means more than putting up fences. It means listening to the land, to the communities that still hold these places close, and to the quiet clues that have survived thousands of years. The oldest structures in Maryland aren't made of stone or brick, they're made of shells, fragile, overlooked, but still here, if only just. The lost city beneath the St. Mary's River. There's a strange kind of stillness along the St. Mary's River. Peaceful, sure, but after a while that quiet starts to feel a little off, like the silence is holding something back. Not just the usual calm of a river, but a kind of hidden weight, as if something beneath the surface hasn't been fully laid to rest. People have lived along this river for thousands of years. You've probably heard of St. Mary's City, Maryland's first colonial capital, founded in 1634 by English settlers. It was built to be a symbol of religious freedom, a fresh start in a new world. But what's often left out of the story is what came before. Long before the English arrived, this place was home to native peoples who lived, traded, and built their own communities right along these banks. Some of those sites were right where the settlers chose to build. And others, they might be gone now, washed away, buried, or sitting quietly at the bottom of the river. Today, St. Mary's City is a historic site with reconstructed buildings, grassy fields, and signs explaining colonial life. Archaeologists have uncovered roads, churches, homes, even an early Jesuit chapel. But just beyond the carefully preserved part of town, strange things keep showing up in the river itself. Divers and sonar teams have reported odd shapes beneath the water, wooden pilings arranged in lines, clusters of stones, and even what look like old foundations. These don't match colonial construction styles. They're older, cruder, but clearly built with purpose, and nobody knows exactly who put them there. Some archaeologists think they might be remnants of an indigenous village that slowly got swallowed up by the river as the land eroded over centuries. Others say it's possible that parts of the early colonial settlement collapsed into the water, especially considering how quickly the original town fell apart in the late 1600s. But then there's a third possibility, the one that keeps this story in mystery territory. What if these remains don't fit neatly into either timeline? What if they belong to something older, a culture that hasn't been fully mapped, with no written record and no real explanation? Local stories hint at something along those lines. Old maps from the 17th and 18th centuries show strange structures on the riverbanks, things that don't appear in official colonial records. And some oral histories passed down by the Piscataway people talk about sacred spots near the river, including a sunken village that was abandoned after a major flood. Whether they meant a literal flood or some kind of metaphor, disease, conflict, colonial invasion, it's not totally clear. But the name stuck, and the memory stuck with it. Here's the thing about the St. Mary's River. It's shallow, but not harmless. Over time, it's eaten away at the land. What was once solid ground in the 1600s might be underwater now. Archaeologists already know that parts of the original colonial site have slipped into the river. Pieces of timber, old bricks, and even household objects have been pulled up from the muddy bottom. So if that happened once, why not earlier? Why not more than once? Back in 2015, researchers scanned the river using sonar and ground-penetrating radar. What they found was surprising. Along sections of the bank, they detected what looked like rows of palisades, wooden defensive walls stretching beyond today's shoreline. In other areas, they spotted groupings of stones and timbers buried under deep layers of sediment, far below where colonial material usually settles. These scans didn't turn up a city in the traditional sense, but they showed patterns, shapes that don't form naturally. One object in particular has puzzled researchers. It's a carved piece of bone shaped like a spiral, found deep in the mud. The markings don't line up with anything from colonial times. It might be indigenous, but even then it doesn't look like traditional Piscataway craftsmanship. So far, it's been cataloged, stored, and left unexplained. Of course, when mysteries like this pop up, fringe theories start to swirl. Some people have speculated, without much hard evidence, that this could be a pre-Columbian contact site, a place where travelers from across the ocean arrived before Columbus, met with local people, and left behind clues. Most historians are skeptical of that idea. There's not enough to back it up, but the odd shapes and unidentifiable artifacts give just enough room for the story to keep going. Skeptics have plenty to say too. Some argue that the underwater structures are just natural features, fallen logs, boulders, or confused remnants of later colonial construction. Maybe the sunken village is more myth than fact. And honestly, that could be true, but then again, a lot of places once thought to be legends, like Troy, turned out to be real once someone started digging. Here, the digging's not so easy. The suspected site sits under 5 feet of muddy water, and the silt gets thicker every year. It's also a protected area. That means no treasure hunters, no amateur digs, and a lot of red tape around what researchers can and can't do. Which is probably for the best, because if there is something truly ancient under there, it deserves more than just a quick excavation. It deserves understanding. Walking around historic St. Mary's City today, you wouldn't guess there's a mystery nearby. It's calm, scenic. You've got walking trails, reenactments, field trips with school kids, but wander off the main path, closer to the edge of the river, and things feel different. The ground gets soft, the wind picks up, and if you pause for just a minute, you can't help but wonder what's right beneath your feet, or maybe just a few yards offshore. Research is ongoing, though it's slow. New scans are being planned, more sonar work is in the pipeline, but every layer of mud adds a new challenge. The river has protected its secrets for a long time. It's not giving them up easily. And maybe that's okay. Because whatever's under the surface, whether it's the remains of a flooded indigenous village, a forgotten part of colonial Maryland, or something we haven't even thought of yet, it's more than just a lost city. It's a reminder of how much we still don't know, how easy it is for entire chapters of history to disappear, not in fire or war, but just in time, in water, in silence. So for now, the story of the St. Mary's River remains unfinished, a mystery half submerged, waiting, and maybe that's the point. Not every mystery needs a perfect ending. Sometimes just knowing it's there is enough to keep us looking. The Haunted Paw Paw Tunnel, Maryland's mountain mystery. Tucked deep in the Appalachian Mountains, right along the Maryland-West Virginia border, there's a tunnel that doesn't just look eerie, it feels it. It's called the Pawpaw Tunnel, and if you've ever walked through it, you know why it stays with people. Even on a warm summer day, the air inside turns cold and damp. The light behind you fades almost instantly, and ahead, there's only a tiny pinprick of daylight at the far end, nearly a mile away. It's dark, it echoes, and it's quiet in a way that doesn't feel natural. Every step you take crunches loud on the gravel, and you start to notice how alone you are in there. But what makes the Pawpaw Tunnel truly unsettling isn't just the atmosphere, it's the stories people tell. Stories that make you glance over your shoulder. Stories of voices, shadows, and maybe even something still trapped inside. Let's start with the history. The tunnel was built in the 1830s as part of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal project. The canal was supposed to link the Potomac River with Ohio, creating a direct route for shipping and trade. The tunnel was meant to cut through the mountain and save time. Simple idea, but the reality? A complete nightmare. What should have taken just a couple years dragged on for more than a decade. The finished tunnel runs over 3,000 feet long and took more than 6 million bricks to build. That's not just impressive, it was exhausting. The conditions were brutal. Workers, mostly poor immigrants from Ireland, Germany, and other parts of Europe, faced long hours, dangerous work, and almost no support. Wages were low, housing was overcrowded, and the longer the project took, the more tempers flared. Different immigrant groups didn't always get along, and it wasn't long before fights started breaking out. Some of those fights ended in blood. There are stories, some documented, others passed down, that men disappeared without explanation. Some say their bodies were hidden in rock falls. Others claim they were sealed into the walls, buried behind the very bricks they laid. and whether or not that part's true, it's where the ghost stories begin. Visitors to the tunnel today still talk about strange things. Shadows that move along the walls, even when no one else is around. Sudden gusts of cold air, with no wind at either entrance. The feeling that someone's walking just behind you, matching your steps, until you stop, and there's nothing. Some people swear they hear voices, muffled, distant, sometimes in old dialects no one speaks anymore. One story in particular sticks around. It's about a worker who was stabbed during a fight over pay. Supposedly he died inside the tunnel, and his body was never found. The legend says if you're walking alone and things go quiet enough, you'll hear him whispering just behind your ear, like he's still waiting for someone to listen. Others report seeing small lights floating through the darkness, soft glows that bob and drift, then vanish before you can get a good look. And then there's the strangest one. Some visitors say the pinhole of light at the far end will suddenly vanish. 1 second it's there, the next it's just gone, like something stepped in front of it, something that shouldn't be there. Of course, there are explanations. The tunnel's long, and your mind plays tricks in the dark. Echoes bounce in weird ways. A breeze through one end can feel like it came from nowhere. It's easy to understand why skeptics say it's all suggestion. You're in a tight, black space for nearly a mile. That's enough to rattle anyone. But then again, talk to someone who's made the full walk alone, and they'll probably tell you the same thing. It just doesn't feel right in there. Even park rangers have had their moments. Some say flashlights stop working near the tunnel, or radios start cutting out for no reason. One ranger once told a story about hearing a splash in the canal while walking alone, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps coming up behind him. When he turned around, no one, and after that, he avoided the tunnel for weeks. From the outside, the Pawpaw Tunnel doesn't look like much. It's a quiet trail leading to a brick arch cut into the mountain. Families hike here all the time. It's part of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal National Historical Park. There are signs, picnic spots, scenic views, totally normal. But once you step inside, things change fast. The temperature drops, the light disappears, and something about the silence feels heavier. That's why it's become a hotspot for ghost hunters. Paranormal investigators have brought in all kinds of equipment: thermal cameras, EMF meters, audio recorders. Some claim to have caught whispers on tape or strange fluctuations in temperature. A few even say they've picked up electronic voice phenomena, those distorted sounds you sometimes hear in ghost documentaries. Nothing definitive has ever been proven, but the interest hasn't gone away. And it's not just the tunnel itself. The path leading to it, the old canal towpath, has its own reputation: overgrown, quiet, and just a little too still. People have reported seeing figures standing along the edge of the trail, dressed like 1800s workers, hats, vests, tools in hand, but when anyone gets close, they vanish. Some believe these are the spirits of canal workers who died during construction, not just of the tunnel, but the canal as a whole. Between accidents, illness, and violence, hundreds of lives were lost along the C&O route. The tunnel, it seems, is where all that energy collects. Despite all this, the tunnel's still open to the public. It's monitored and maintained. You can walk at any time during daylight hours, and plenty of people do. But even on the brightest day, most folks move a little faster once they're inside. The laughter dies down, the conversations drop to whispers, and nearly everyone breathes a little easier once they see the daylight again. Nearby towns like Old Town have leaned into the stories. Haunted tours, folk tales printed on brochures, even local ghost story nights. Some of it's dramatized, sure, but the darker parts of the history, the grueling labor, the violence, the way people were treated during construction, those parts are all too real. If you visit the Pawpaw Tunnel today, you'll find a scenic trail through the woods, a historic canal path, and a perfectly walkable tunnel carved through mountain rock. It's peaceful, beautiful even, but underneath all that is something else, something older, something unsettled. You won't find any gravestones or memorials here, no museum plaques for the men who died, disappeared, or were never named. What's left of them might be buried in the land, or the brick, or maybe just in the stories, but the place remembers. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, one thing's certain: once you walk that tunnel, you won't forget it. Not the cold, not the dark, not the feeling that someone or something might be walking right behind you. Port Tobacco, the Forgotten Dead. Tucked into a quiet bend of the Potomac River in southern Maryland, the town of Port Tobacco doesn't look like much these days. A few gravel roads, a handful of restored buildings, and a kind of stillness you don't often find, the kind that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. But don't let its sleepy look fool you. This place was once one of the busiest ports on the East Coast. second only to Baltimore. Ships came and went, tobacco ruled the economy, and political power flowed right through here. But buried beneath all that history, beneath the ruins and the stories people like to tell, there's something deeper, something older, something most people don't talk about. Long before any colonists arrived, this land was home to native peoples, tribes like the Piscataway, the Pawpaw, and others. For thousands of years they lived, traded, and held ceremonies on this ground. The river made it a natural gathering spot, full of fish, game, and fertile land. And up on a low ridge overlooking what's now Port Tobacco, there was a sacred site, a burial ground, according to local tradition, not just for the dead but for elders, leaders, and spiritual figures. The kind of place you approach with respect. That part of the story didn't make it into many textbooks, and when the colonists showed up in the 1600s, they didn't pause to consider what the land might have meant. They just built right over it. There are no official markers today, no fence, no plaque, just a grassy slope beside the historic district. But over the years, whenever someone dug, whether for a well, a foundation, or a road, they found things, human remains. Sometimes full skeletons, sometimes just fragments. Most of them were quietly moved or reburied, especially back in the 1800s when there wasn't much interest in native history. To the people doing the digging, the past was just an obstacle, but the ground didn't forget. Over time, locals began whispering about a curse, that the town's long, slow fall from a major port to a forgotten village wasn't just bad luck or economics. They said the spirits of the land had been disturbed, and that Port Tobacco had never really recovered. Whether you believe in that kind of thing or not, the timing is interesting. The town boomed in the 1700s, then the river silted up, the tobacco industry declined, and by the time the Civil War came around, Port Tobacco was already fading. It never bounced back, and with the decline came the ghost stories. There's the lady in white, for starters. People say she appears near the ruins of the old courthouse. Pale dress, face hidden behind a veil, moving slowly through the early morning fog. Some believe she's mourning a lost love. Others think she's guarding something. They've seen her walking toward the river, only to vanish just before reaching the edge. Then there's the Phantom Rider, a man in colonial clothes seen late at night galloping down an old stretch of road on a black horse. Witnesses say you hear the hoofbeats before you ever see him, and when you turn your head, he's already fading into the trees. Some say he was a smuggler, shot by British troops. Others claim he trespassed on sacred ground and was cursed to ride forever. But the stories that really stick with people are the ones that come from those who tried to disturb the land. Every few years, someone gets curious, an amateur archaeologist, a local with a metal detector, or just someone who wants to see what's really out there. They dig near the suspected burial area, especially during dry spells when the river pulls back, and afterward, strange things start happening. Tools vanish, electronics glitch, pets act like something's in the room when nothing's there. Some people get sick out of nowhere. Others say they feel watched, even in the middle of the day, with no one around. One story stands out. In the early 1990s, a small team came in with ground-penetrating radar, hoping to locate unmarked graves. They didn't make it far. The equipment failed almost immediately. Batteries died, readings scrambled, signals cut out. They left and came back with brand new gear. But the second they stepped into the same spot, the problem started again. No one could explain it. You could chalk it up to bad luck or old machines. But when the same kind of thing happens over and over, it starts to feel like more than just coincidence, like the land itself is saying no. In recent years, some tribal members and historians have tried to get the site officially recognized as a native burial ground. But without paperwork or precise records, there's been little progress. Oral traditions speak clearly about what the land meant, but legally, that doesn't carry the same weight. Meanwhile, the stories keep circulating, and the ground stays mostly untouched. And then there's Port Tobacco's strange connection to one of the biggest events in American history, the Lincoln assassination. After John Wilkes Booth shot the president, he fled south and passed right through this area. One of his co-conspirators, Dr. Samuel Mudd, had strong ties to Port Tobacco. Some say the chaos and fear that followed Booth's escape left a spiritual scar on the town, another layer of unrest on top of what was already there. People who visit today often say the same thing. It's beautiful, yes, quiet, but also unsettling, like you're being watched by something that's been here a lot longer than you have. The courthouse museum is peaceful. The air smells like old wood and dust, but something about the silence is thick. It's not just the absence of noise, it's the presence of memory, of things not said. Walk the trail down to the river at dawn, and you might hear birds and wind in the trees, or you might hear something else. A soft rustle in the tall grass, a whisper too low to catch, the sudden sense that someone's just behind you. Most people shake it off, others don't come back. Interestingly, not all the stories are fearful. Some say the spirits here aren't angry, just watchful. They want to be respected, left in peace. Their message isn't vengeance, it's memory. A reminder that this land wasn't empty when the colonists arrived, that it was already full of life, stories, and meaning. And maybe that's what gives Port Tobacco its strange power. It's not just about ghosts or history, or even injustice. It's about layers, what's been built, what's been buried, and what refuses to disappear. You don't need to believe in the supernatural to feel it. The silence speaks for itself. So if you ever find yourself driving the back roads of southern Maryland, and you come across a sign for Port Tobacco, stop for a while, walk the gravel paths, sit by the courthouse, stand quietly on that old hill and listen. You might not see anything, you might not hear anything, but you'll feel it, because some places never let go, and some stories aren't finished telling themselves. The Calvert Cliffs fossils walk along the beach beneath Calvert Cliffs, and you're not just walking beside the water, you're stepping into deep time. These cliffs stretch along the Chesapeake Bay for nearly 30 miles, and they're not just a pretty backdrop for your hike, they're full of history, layer by layer, packed with the remains of animals that lived here millions of years ago. Shark teeth, whale bones, turtle shells, they fall out of the cliffs like pieces from a forgotten puzzle. But there's something else about this place. Some say these cliffs hold more than just fossils. They say there are strange things in the rock, things that don't belong, and maybe, just maybe, clues to something we don't fully understand yet. According to geologists, the story goes back about 10 to 20 million years. Back then, during the Miocene epoch, this entire area was underwater. A shallow sea stretched across what's now southern Maryland. It was filled with all kinds of life: giant sharks, early whales, rays, fish, birds. When these animals died, their remains sank into the mud and sand. Over time, those layers built up and hardened, locking everything inside like a time capsule. Eventually, the land rose and the sea pulled back. Erosion, weather, and shifting ground did the rest, carving out the steep cliffs we see today. Every time a storm rolls through or a chunk of the cliff collapses, something new gets uncovered. And what people find here is incredible. Teeth from megalo, giant sharks that could grow longer than a school bus, big enough to fill your whole hand. Whale skulls, still wedged into the cliff face. Bones from crocodiles and birds that no longer exist. It's one of the most active fossil sites on the East Coast, and it draws everyone from professional paleontologists to kids with beach buckets. Most folks who come with a sieve and a sharp eye leave with a fossil or two. But not all finds fit the script. There are stories, mostly traded quietly in fossil hunting circles, about objects that seem out of place. A few people say they've pulled things from the cliff layers that look shaped or carved. One guy claimed he found what looked like a tool, something chipped from stone, buried in a layer that should have been 15 million years old. Another swears he found a tooth that doesn't match anything known to science, spiral-shaped with jagged edges, like something out of a sci-fi movie. None of these claims have been proven, and you won't find them in museum displays, but they get passed around anyway, and the questions stick. Could something have been here even before we think possible? Some fringe theorists have jumped in with wilder ideas. They say the fossil record here doesn't just show life, it shows destruction, that the dense fossil layers could point to ancient disasters, underwater volcanoes, violent climate shifts, or maybe even something stranger. There's a small camp that claims certain mineral patterns and twisted bone shapes are signs of ancient weapons or advanced energy blasts. Evidence, they say, of a lost civilization or a prehistoric war. Now, to be clear, mainstream scientists aren't buying it. Most odd shapes in the rock can be explained by natural processes, compression, chemical changes, or just millions of years of wear and tear. But even if you're skeptical, there's something about holding a megalodon tooth in your hand that makes you wonder what else might be hiding under the cliffs. Another mystery here is how fast it's all slipping away. The cliffs are crumbling, little by little. With each passing year, parts of the wall collapse, sometimes burying rare fossils before anyone gets a chance to study them. Whole new species could be lost this way. Animals we've never even seen before, disappearing before we know they existed. There's a kind of quiet urgency to it. Fossil hunters know it. You're racing erosion. Some days you get lucky. Other days the cliff takes back more than it gives. And yet it's not just about fossils. A lot of people who visit Calvert Cliffs describe a feeling they can't quite explain. Peaceful, sure, but also a little unsettling. The cliffs rise high above you, silent and watchful. The waves hit the shore, the wind moves through the reeds. And then maybe you hear a rumble as part of the cliff lets go. It's a place that never stops shifting, and somehow you can feel that in your bones. Locals have their own stories too. One resident said the cliffs hum after heavy storms, not from falling rock or ocean noise, something lower, almost like a vibration in the air. Others say they've seen strange lights at night, blue-white orbs that flicker along the beach then vanish. The usual explanations get tossed around: reflected lights, swamp gas, maybe boats offshore. But when enough people describe the same thing, it makes you pause. And then there's the idea of luck. Some fossil hunters believe the cliffs are picky. They say if you come looking for a big score, something to sell or show off, you'll walk away empty-handed. But if you're patient, respectful, and open to whatever the cliffs want to give, you'll find something. It might be small, but it'll feel like it matters. Something smooth in the sand, a shape you almost missed, a feeling that it found you. Part of the cliffs are protected by Calvert Cliffs State Park, but not all of it. Erosion is a constant battle, and parts of the shoreline are privately owned. Digging rules vary, and some people worry that too much human activity, legal or not, is speeding up the damage. There's tension between protecting the site and keeping it open to the public. Fossils are science, yes, but they're also personal. People feel connected to what they find, like they're part of the story. If you do visit, take your time. Bring a fossil sieve if you want, sure, but also bring a sense of curiosity. Watch how the cliffs lean over the beach like ancient sentinels. Notice the layers in the rock, each one a chapter in Earth's story. And try to imagine the sea that once covered this place, full of creatures we've barely begun to understand. You won't leave with all the answers. In fact, you might leave with more questions. But you'll have touched something older than any human record, something deeper than words. And maybe, if you're lucky, the cliffs will offer you a small piece of that story to carry home. The Black Aggie of Druid Ridge Cemetery. If you find yourself walking through Druid Ridge Cemetery in Pikesville, Maryland, you might not notice the statue at first. It's not especially tall or elaborate, a seated figure in a shroud, its head bowed, hands resting on its lap. But once you see it, really see it, you'll understand why generations of visitors have called it one of the eeriest statues in America. They called her the Black Aggie. The legend starts with the statue itself, which wasn't originally created to be unsettling. It's actually a copy, an unauthorized one, of a famous sculpture by Augustus St. Gaudens, a somber figure meant to represent grief. The original is part of the Adams Memorial in Washington, D.C., but the version that ended up in Druid Ridge had a different feel. The surface darkened quickly to a dull gray black. The features looked more severe. The shadows clung to her in a way that made people uncomfortable, and before long, the story started. No one's sure exactly when the legend took root, but by the early 20th century, Black Aggie had become something of a dare. Teenagers would sneak into the cemetery at night to test the statue's powers. They said that if you sat on her lap at midnight, she would come to life, or you wouldn't live to see morning. Others claimed she opened her eyes in the dark, that the grass wouldn't grow in her shadow, that the spirits of the dead gathered around her after sunset. The more people talked, the darker the stories became. A visitor in the 1940s swore they saw her arm move as they passed. Another claimed the air around her was always cold, even in the heat of summer. Then came the tale of the man who challenged the curse, sat in her lap as a joke, and was found dead the next morning from an apparent heart attack. Was it fear, coincidence, or something else? It didn't help that the cemetery itself had a quiet, somber feel even before the statue arrived. Druid Ridge is old, dating back to the 1800s, with winding paths, ivy-covered stones, and a deep stillness that settles in as soon as you pass through the gates. It's the kind of place where time feels paused, and every gust of wind seems to carry a whisper, the perfect setting for a legend. As more people came to test the myth, vandalism followed. The statue was chipped and scratched. The base was tagged with graffiti. Offerings were left, coins, flowers, even notes. Some visitors claimed they saw strange lights flickering near the figure at night. Others spoke of headaches, nausea, or an overwhelming sense of dread when standing too close. There were reports of cameras failing to work near the statue or photos turning out strangely distorted. Whether that was paranormal or just bad luck, no one could say. Eventually, the caretakers had enough. The statue was removed in the late 1960s and donated to the Smithsonian. Today, it resides in the courtyard of the National Museum of American Art. But the myth didn't leave with it. The base still remains in the cemetery, empty but not forgotten. People still visit, still whisper, still glance over their shoulder. Some say the statue's energy never left, that it imprinted on the ground itself. And here's where the story starts to blur the line between urban legend and something harder to dismiss. Some locals believe the statue absorbed the grief and mourning of all the people buried nearby. That over time what was just bronze and stone became something more, something that watched, remembered, maybe even judged. Others think the legend gave it power, that the attention, the fear, the stories acted like fuel, transforming the statue into a kind of psychic mirror, reflecting back what people brought to it. Whatever the truth is, Black Aggie has left a deep imprint on Maryland folklore. She's inspired stories, poems, even short films, and while the statue itself no longer sits in the cemetery, the legend has only grown. The empty pedestal draws curious visitors who want to feel the energy for themselves. Most leave with a story, a photo, or maybe just the memory of a place that feels heavier than it should. Today, Druid Ridge is still a working cemetery, but it's also a place where the past presses in just a little closer. The old trees creak in the wind, the stones wear the names of generations long gone, and if you walk near where Aggie once sat, you might feel it, the chill, the pull, that small instinct telling you not to linger. There's nothing flashy about the legend of Black Aggie. No monsters, no dramatic hauntings, no historic tragedy to tie it all together. Just a statue, a sense of presence, and a long chain of people who swear they felt something they couldn't explain. And maybe that's what makes it so compelling. It's not about what you see, it's about what you feel. So if you go to Druid Ridge, don't expect fireworks, expect quiet, expect stillness, expect the kind of silence that makes you listen a little harder. Because whether the statue is there or not, some part of her story still lingers. Moyaone, the sacred town of the Piscataway. Just across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., in the quiet woods of southern Maryland, there's a stretch of land that feels different. You notice it right away. The trees seem older, the air feels heavier somehow. People say the forest here listens, watches, as if it remembers something. This place is called the Moyaone Reserve. Today it's a peaceful residential area, tucked between protected parklands and conservation areas. But long before any modern homes were built, this was the site of a powerful Native American capital, a town called Moyaone, heart of the Piscataway people. To the Piscataway, Moyaone wasn't just another settlement. It was sacred, a place of leadership, ceremony, and connection. It sat on high ground with a view of the Potomac River, its longhouses spread out around ceremonial spaces, trails leading off to other nearby villages. This was where the Tayak, the paramount chief, lived, a leader chosen not just for authority but for deep spiritual knowledge. When English explorers arrived in the early 1600s, they stumbled across something far more complex than they expected. The Piscataway Confederacy had real structure, trade routes, diplomacy, systems of law and tradition that had been in place for generations. To outsiders, Moyaone might have looked like a cluster of thatched homes in the woods, but it was the capital of a thriving society. The arrival of colonists brought change fast. At first, there were treaties, exchanges, attempts at peace, but things shifted. More settlers came. Forests were cleared, diseases spread. Within just a few decades, the balance had tipped. By the end of the 1600s, the Piscataway's power was fading. Moyaone was eventually abandoned. The land was divided and settled. The name began to vanish from maps and memory, but the story didn't disappear entirely. The descendants of the Piscataway people never forgot what this land meant. Over time, as development pushed deeper into the region, a strange thing started to happen. People began feeling drawn to the area, not because of the history, but because of how the land felt. In the mid-1900s, a small community of artists, writers, and conservationists began settling in what's now the Moyaone Reserve. They didn't know the full backstory, but many of them talked about a certain peace here, a sense of being connected to something older. They said the forest felt alive, not just thriving, but aware. Later, when some of them learned about the land's deeper past, it all made sense. Of course, this was sacred ground. Of course, it felt different. The stillness wasn't just about being out in nature. It was something else, something that had held on, even after the town itself had vanished. Today, the Moyaone Reserve is part of a much larger protected stretch of forest and riverside land, including Piscataway Park and the National Colonial Farm. But a lot of what's left of ancient Moyaone lies beneath private homes, modern roads and wooded trails, pottery shards, stone tools, burial sites. They're out there. Some have been found. Most haven't. Many areas haven't been formally excavated, which makes things tricky. Some residents don't even realize they're living on top of an archaeological site. Others do, and they speak carefully about it. They talk about feelings they can't quite explain, places on their property where electronics glitch out, or where pets refuse to go, recurring dreams with fire circles and unfamiliar voices. One woman described hearing distant chanting late at night, always from the direction of the river, always the same rhythm. But for Piscataway tribal members who visit, this isn't creepy, it's sacred. They describe the land as holding memory, a presence. Some call it a portal, not to another world, but to another time, a place where the spiritual and physical overlap. Not haunted, not angry, just alive. And in recent years, that memory has started to come forward again. Maryland has formally recognized the Piscataway people as a tribe. Ceremonies have returned, ancestors have been reburied with proper respect, and local efforts, both native and non-native, have helped protect what's left of the land. Still, the mystery lingers. What else is buried out there deep under the roots and soil? How much of Moyaone still lies hidden, waiting to be rediscovered? What knowledge disappeared when the town was erased from the maps? If you walk the trails near the river now, you'll notice the silence isn't quite like anywhere else. It's not empty, it's full. The trees seem to lean in. The light feels filtered, thoughtful. You don't see ruins. There are no stone temples or carved monuments. But something is here. You can feel it. It's subtle, not the kind of thing that hits you all at once. But if you're the kind of person who pays attention to places, you'll know. This land is being watched over. Not in a menacing way, more like an old guardian sitting quietly, waiting to see if you treat it with respect. Moyaone isn't a ghost town in the usual sense. It's deeper than that. It's not a place of echoes or shadows. It's a place of presence, of memory. A place where the past didn't leave, it just went quiet. And if you stand still long enough, it might speak to you too.